I was sitting in my office in January this year, and I got a phone call, and it was from a gentleman I'd never heard of called Peter, who had actually heard me talking on Russell Brand and reciting that speech there. He revealed that you were going to make a microfilm, not a microfilm kind of compressing Shakespeare into 2 minutes, but a microfilm focused on a particular set of speeches, a particular situation, and a particular message, which is where Shakespeare is talking from his time to us. And I couldn't imagine a better project.
I was already aware of the Stranger speech. I'd heard Ian McKellen do it on a few podcasts and on YouTube, but it wasn't until I heard Professor Tony Howard speaking on a different podcast about the same speech, and also about some of his work chronicling the history of Black and Asian actors in the history of Shakespeare performance, that the idea came together to adapt this speech in a contemporary setting.
This project came about for me through an email from Peter, who I've worked with before on Treading. He said, "Do you want to do some Shakespeare?" And I said, "Yeah, sounds like a good idea." I thought it was a great opportunity to bring some Shakespeare to life for a modern audience in a modern platform.
I remember a couple of years ago at the height of the European migrant crisis, this speech got a lot of media attention as to how instructive it could be for people today. At the time there was a lot of dehumanising language going around, people talking about swarms of migrants, and the fact that this piece of writing from hundreds of years ago could be so helpful to how we should act today.
In this play, Sir Thomas More, the first scenes show how he comes to power as an important figure in society, because he comes along and he quells riots in London, which are basically xenophobic, racist, anti-immigrant riots. He gives his own eloquence, I think, to Thomas More, and allows Thomas More to put exactly that argument for empathy, that you cannot be hostile until you realize that what you do will be done to you, or maybe what you do might be done to you. So if you can understand what suffering is empathetically, then you behave in a much more humane way. And the miracle of that scene and those speeches is it works. And the people who, to begin with, are inflamed by a sense of injustice and hatred of foreigners, willingly acquiesce to peace and authority.
Playing the role of Thomas More was a challenge, particularly because there's so many emotional levels at which this character is operating. On one level, he's a common man, mixing amongst his people, but on another level, he has to quell their unrest and capture their attention and draw from a whole set of rhetorical devices and imagery. The gift of Shakespeare is that because the text is so enriched by itself, a lot of that work is done for the actor. So it was really spending a lot of time sort of searching through the treasure chest of this speech, if you will, and drawing from the imagery the relevant emotions, which for me, I created this idea that Thomas More isn't a saint. He hasn't always embodied the values which he advocates in this speech, that in fact he has a skewered past where he's made mistakes, where he's been guilty of the things he's condemning in this speech, and that he's transformed himself and redeemed himself, and in doing that he realizes the duplicity which is in every human being, the capacity for good and evil, and through being aware of that, he's able to rally them and to change them.
The most challenging part of the shoot was definitely how much we needed to get done inside of one day. It was a very ambitious script and a lot to cover in one day. So we really had to plan our movements and our shots and know them like the back of our hand. And even with all that prep, it was still a really difficult task to achieve on the day.
Shakespeare isn't just a thing of the past. Shakespeare isn't just a performance, but that Shakespeare is relevant. There are messages in there. There are shared messages about our humanity, and there are also individual messages that we must find for ourselves.
My hopes for the film are that it gets seen by a large audience, and hopefully a young audience, and maybe audiences who have never seen Shakespeare before or think that Shakespeare isn't for them. My hope is that it will only be once they're already engaged in viewing the film that they realise that they're watching Shakespeare. And I hope that the message of empathy is translated.
The speech itself is so powerful and the scene is so incredibly good, and I feel really proud and honoured to have been part of the financial background to making this possible.